The following video was digitized from 16mm film at the Office of Image Archaeology. This film was contributed by Blair, who was also our narrator. Blair is the second son of Art and Marion Blair and was, at the time of this interview, 71 years young. His brother Ron, who also appears in this film, was 74 at the time of this interview. The Blair Brothers lumber mill, logging and mill operations was located north of Pacific House, just a little east of Pollock Pines and Fresh Pond on Highway 50. The mill began operations sometime in the 1930s, and the property was sold to the Michigan-California Lumber Company in 1958. Shortly after, Michigan-California raised the property, took down all the buildings, and sold the equipment. The retail operations continued in Placerville.
First, we're looking at some winter scenes that my dad took with a 16mm. I don't know how long he'd had it, and I think that might have been George Lucas that was walking on the snow. This particular winter, I don't remember the year, but it was in the early 1950s. That's the office on the mill property. That is the lumber mill proper. The burner for all of the slash. That was part of the drying operation for the mill operation. There was no dry kiln for drying the lumber. It was air dried. The lumber camp. What you're looking at is Peavine Ridge up on top. This is from the burner looking down into the mill. That was my dad's dog named Spook. That's me on the right, my brother on the left, brother Ron. Not exactly how old I am there. 9, 10, 8. I can't remember that. I remember the skis. I remember skiing. And that's what you're looking up on the left there is an outhouse, because we used outhouses there. There's a storm coming in. My dad wanted to get what he could of that. It was a particularly nasty storm, as you'll see in a few minutes here. As the storm was coming in, he tried to get as much good shot of it as he could. Of course, this is all pre-Photoshop. You might call it Photoshop minus 5.0, something like that. I have no idea how many days the storm lasted, or if it was one storm on top of another, but there's a pretty good snow buildup coming on. The lumber mill had cabins for, or not the lumber mill, but the lumber mill site, cabins for bachelor workers, cabins for families, houses for families. Had a cookhouse, served 3 meals a day, really nice food. These guys that are working at the mill, they needed lots of food, lots of calories to keep it going. There was a clubhouse with hot showers. What you're looking at right there is the root cellar and utility room at where we lived, my family lived. That's the shop building. Coming down the road here in a minute is Roy Mayfield and Philip Tuma. Well, that's not them. That's my dad's dog, Spook. There they are. Roy Mayfield had a daughter, Corley. Bud Tuma, son and a daughter, Philip and Sharon. And we were all in school together. There was a one-room schoolhouse up on a hill above all of this stuff. And we had at one time probably 20 kids. It was a branch of the Pollock Pines School. It actually had a name of Big Bend School. And eventually the school was closed down, and we were bussed out to Pollock Pines. I think I was in the 3rd grade. Philip and I were in the 3rd grade when we got bussed out to Pollock Pines. That is a World War II command car. There were about 3 miles of road from Pacific House to the lumber camp. And summer and winter, these roads had to be maintained. That was a whoops, here we are. My brother on the left, he had the good shovel. I didn't have the good shovel. He made good progress. But you can see that's a pretty good snowfall. Gordon Blair and Yvonne, his wife, she happened to be using the outhouse. That's their dog Trilby. They lived in Placerville. Gordon was working at the lumber yard in Placerville, the retail yard. Here we are, a bunch of us getting bussed out to from Pacific House to the Pollock Pines School.
What station is that?
That was right at Pacific House. I think that was Corley in the back there with the glasses. And like I said, we had to, not including me, but the roads had to be maintained summer and winter. These are some scenes right around Pacific House. That's Floyd Poole's house, Floyd and Georgie Poole. But you'll see in a minute what a nasty storm can do to a dirt road. Emmett Smith, who was a sawyer and the saw filer, had a little mine going there also. Brockless Creek runs into the South Fork of the American River. The bridge that went into the river, that crossed the river into the mill on this road, was built in the 1930s. And in the summertime, when the planks on the bridge dried up, from down in the swimming hole below the bridge, and below, that's my mother dropping down into the ditch right there, Marion. But the planks on the bridge, they would just go clatter, 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 and we would be in the swimming hole down below the bridge. We'd look up, people would stop, get out of their car and wave. We'd wave back. We had to shuttle back and forth from the mill to Pacific House. What you just saw was a World War II ambulance, and Bud Toomey, the guy with the blue over his head, he had a toothache there. Quite a guy. He was a dry lumber piler, or a green lumber piler in the summertime, but he was also a great gunsmith and a good welder. He built a plow to put on top, plow and a winch system for that ambulance. What's really interesting, and I never really thought about this for some time, is that these films, probably in the early 1950s, could be no more than 10 years after the close of World War II. So a lot of the guys that worked here, operated the equipment, were veterans. And I don't know which, I don't know what branch. It's just that war was over and they had to go back to work. Here they are. That's Tom Moran operating the D8. The guy was like magic with that blade. This starts a series of shots for the operation of the woods crew, the logging truck system transporting the logs to the mill, and then passing a log through the mill until it comes out lumber on the other side. Obviously, this stuff was done long before OSHA, and I don't know if the Fish and Game had anything to do with this or there was any permits required or not, but kind of messed up the trout habitat for a short while. Building a bridge across what I think is Silver Creek, which it runs very close to Ice House Resort on Ice House Road. It could even be Joan Silver, Big Silver, I don't know. But this is how to build a bridge. Tom Moran again on the D8. My grandfather, my dad's father, born in 1884, was on this trip on this day. Pretty nice bridge. There's going to be a sequence here of 3 trees going down. All 3 trees were undercut and back cut, but the 3 trees went down with the first tree taken down, the second 2. They were left standing. There are going to be some big sugar pines. Look at that. If you had a few of those on your property today, you'd be a rich person. Those are sugar pines. Blair Brothers Blair Brothers did not own timberland. They leased timberland, or they bought timber rights or a timber sale from the National Forest. Here we are setting up a landing. That cable system is being run by what's called a donkey. It's pretty sure it's diesel operated, but if OSHA were there, this would never have been completed as it is. But the cables are attached. There's only one pole, and the cables holding the tree and holding the poles in place are attached to trees. This is called a landing, where the trees are brought out of the woods, dropped to a central location, then loaded onto the logging trucks for transport to the mill. Some of the men's names I remember, some I don't. I don't remember the cat skinner. That's the guy driving that cat. I don't remember his name. Nice piece of incense cedar there. I remember my dad talking about pencil stock. You pick up a yellow Ticonderoga pencil, and it's made with cedar. It's cedar. Pencil stock is a very fine-grained cedar, easy to work with. At the lumber mill, there was no lumber pond, there was no railroad. All of the lumber was dried, air dried. You'll get a look at that pretty soon. This is how a logging truck is loaded. That looks like Sam Tripp. What you're looking at there is some ponderosa pine. Not that particular piece. That's cedar again, incense cedar. That's the donkey right there. That man had a nice touch. That piece on top is a ponderosa pine. There was some beautiful timber up in the woods back then. When you take a look at these trucks that they're using, it's nothing like you see going down the highway today. Notice the vented windshield. Tom Moran always had a cigarette in his mouth. I don't remember that man's name. Some big timber up there. Blair Brothers got a lot of timber from the Van Vleck family, cattle ranchers who lived down in the Slough House area on Highway 16. They also owned the property up on Ice House Road that is east of Rob's Peak. And if you're familiar with that area, just north of Union Valley Reservoir is Rob's Saddle. You just right up to the top of Rob's Saddle, and the road into the Van Vleck property turned off to the right at the top of the saddle. National Forest now owns the Van Vleck property in there. And so far as I know, the Van Vleck family is still raising cattle in the Slough House area. When I was a kid, well, 5 years old, 6 years old, I was standing out near that root cellar wash house that you saw in the winter pictures. Of course, it's just a hot, dry summer. Hope OSHA doesn't see this. A little late for that anyway. But I was standing out in front of that wash house, and this man came riding up on his horse, a genuine cowboy. And that was probably 1948, 1949. And I believe it was Stanley Van Vleck. Because Van Vleck had a property out to the west of the lumber mill. And ranch house, barn, etc. And they would bring their cattle up from the Slough House area, bring them into summer pasture up in this area. Well, around the mill site, out to the west of the mill site. That's a truck. That is a big log. Looks like a piece of sugar pine. That's my grandfather on the left, Arthur James Blair. Clark Smith. Tom Moran again. My grandfather left, my father Arthur Eugene on the right. He was the one that was filming all this stuff. Going to be a sequence coming up of the 3 trees going down. Take a good look at this saw, at the length of it, the size of the engine, and the guy on the tail end. That piece was called a stinger on the back side there. And he needed to be there because the blade was pretty flexible. If a tree falls in the forest and nobody hears it, does it make a sound? Head faller for this operation was a guy named Wentworth. He did a pretty good job on this stuff. There's Spook again. When I was probably 12, 13 years old, Philip Tuma and I took a ride up to a landing site in one of the logging trucks. And we stayed there until the truck was loaded, then we came back down. And the smell in that landing was rich. If you don't crawl around up in the woods very much, you don't realize how warm, how hot it can be, and how dry. And that landing was a very dirty, dusty place. The truck would come in, or the cat would come in. All right, these are the trees that are going to go down together. But the smell in that landing place was diesel from the donkey engine. It was fresh cut pine, fir, and cedar, dust. And it was just a rich, heavy smell, plus the smell of the sunshine on dead pine needles on the ground. It, kind of a pungent smell. Never forget it. Well, there they go. The mill operation was run by my father, Arthur Eugene. The woods operations were run by Fritz Blair. The lumberyard, retail lumberyard, and wholesale operations were run by Gordon Blair and Clark Smith, all first cousins. This is from up on Peavine Ridge looking down on our mill site, and across the river canyon you saw another stack of smoke coming up out of the trees. That was Placerville Lumber Company. They eventually moved their operation down into the Placerville area itself. Notice the cable system again. This is how the logs were unloaded from the trucks at the mill site. That looked to me like Fritz Blair. I remember him. He wore t-shirts. That's the mouth of the mill itself. No mill pond. In the summer, it's hot, dry, dusty. The people that worked in lumber mills, even now, it was hard work. And it was just what they did. It's what they knew. It's what they were used to. They didn't pick up their phone and text somebody every 10 minutes. They didn't have any computers. PG&E didn't get to this mill site until, I guess, the late 1940s or very early 50s. So everything here was run on steam. And even in these pictures, there's a lot of steam operation going on. Run the cable underneath the log truck, hook it on something on the ground, pull up the cable, and off go the logs. That little engine you just saw, a little steam engine, is what pulled the log up to the entrance of the mill proper. Look at that dust. How would you like to work in that all day? But anyway, hello OSHA. That's a pretty big log. It's heavy. That little steam engine on the right is pulling in another log to the mill proper. The smells around here, the burner, you'll see the burner pretty quick. It's what burnt the excess of sawdust and the bark slabs and trimmings that came off from the mill operation itself in the lumber making process. You had the smell of that. You had the smell of the boiler fires for making steam down in the lumber drying area. If you walk through in the summer, you had this rich smell of fresh cut lumber and a dampness in the air, a moistness. And every summer a bunch of us kids would have a job about 50 cents an hour, I think. Look at the size of that log. Sugar pine. Beautiful piece of lumber there. But when the thistles would start growing up in the lumber yard, lumber drying area, we'd walk through there with a McLeod rake. Had a sharp edge on one side for chopping. We'd chop down thistles. 2,330 board feet in that piece, just in that one butt log. Emmett Smith there on your bottom right, he is the sawyer. The guy on the carriage is Milton Rose. He actually set the depth of the cut. The sawyer operated the movement of the carriage and the loading of the log onto the carriage. Grab a hold of that thing. Try it again. Well, I guess it's stable. Inside the mill itself, it's warm, it's damp, just moist air full of the smell of fresh cut lumber and bark. Ponderosa pine right there. Sawdust everywhere, not everywhere, just small stuff in the air. Notice that the saws are not protected. There's Milt Rose. And the sawyer, you can just barely see him over there, actually to the right of the saws. He operated a joystick just like a pilot. George Lucas running the trim saws. Sometimes lumber would come through there so fast he didn't know what to do. But he did it. He got it done. Here's the conveyor belt going up into the burner. I remember getting in the conveyor belt itself, walking or riding it up to where the conveyor turned from a wood trough into a steel trough. That was to keep the conveyor from burning. I'd get out at the steel trough and walk back down the catwalk. These guys are pulling lumber, fresh cut, call it green lumber. That's a green chain that they're operating because it's green lumber, fresh cut. And they're loading it by species, grade, thickness. That's hard work. That's just plain hard work. That load right there is going out into the drying area to be piled. Man up on top, well, that's my dad. He would grade lumber occasionally, give the grader a break. Grader was Luddy Miller. Don't know what Luddy was for, Ludwig maybe. Don't remember the names of the green chain guys. But that lumber doesn't stop. It just keeps coming. Notice the width of that stuff. That looked like shop pine. Probably sugar pine. Orrin Wood driving the truck, and his son Delbert. Could have been Joe. Don't remember. There's Luddy Miller grading the lumber. And that lumber just keeps on coming. One guy, if he's not pulling stuff off, he pushed it over for the other guy to give him a break. A little helping hand. The lumber then is taken out into the drying yard to be piled. Like I said, there's no dry kiln here. It was all air dried. This is springtime. They're doing some maintenance on the stacks that come up from the boiler area. The carriage was operated by steam. The head saws, electricity. We got to paint those stacks. I didn't realize how big around those stacks were. But that... I'd probably like to do that job. Frank McDonald, he's the boiler man. Get another look at him in a minute. He had a hot, dirty job. There he is. I wrecked my brother's bicycle one time and I took it over to his house late at night in the summer because I wrenched the handlebars on his new bike, and Frank said, "I can't fix that." This is a tram system, the only railroad tracks in the place. And Orrin Wood and his son Delbert, or Joe, don't know which one, are pushing this load from the green chain out to be piled. That's where the lumber was dried. All of that is piled by hand, and the guys that did the piling actually had a contract of so many thousand board feet, either per day or per season, I don't know. That's the base. Those are the foundations where the lumber is piled. Those two guys had the easier job. Bud Tuma on the right, Philip's father, Philip and Sharon's father, and Oscar Frizzell on the left in the white shirt. Right now, Oscar's got the heavy job. Bud's got the easy job, if you call that easy. This is a planing mill. You're taking the rough lumber, running it through a planer, and it comes out 2x4, 2x6, 1x10, 1x12 pine, piece of siding, piece of interior paneling. That's dry lumber. That's the easy stuff. It almost flies into the hands. That last piece was a gang saw.